Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to continue our lecture series on the frontier and the expansion of the United States. And so we left off yesterday talking about Texas and the Mexican American War. Well, uh, we remember we did not actually, annex Texas right away, and we didn't make it a state right away because the fear of Northerners that it would give the slave states too much power in the American government. And so, before Texas can become a state, and Texas is like super valuable economically, so it is in America's best interest to make Texas a state, but Northerners are never going to accept that if it means the slave states are going to become more powerful than the northern states. And so Oregon starts to become a huge focus. Oregon starts to mean a whole lot more. Now, Oregon is also important because there's a lumber industry up there. There is definitely the idea of access to the Pacific Ocean is important for trade to the United States, and it's not just Oregon; it's Oregon, Washington, and parts of Canada today that are known as British Columbia. The Americans have been in the Oregon Territory ever since Lewis and Clark went out there. But we've had the population of Americans living in that area are very low. The British are also there. And so there's this real serious dispute about which territory is American and which territory is British. The British are claiming a bunch of land that is considered today to be America, and America's doing the same thing. We're claiming a bunch of land that is today considered to be Canadian, and so we want more than we end up with. The British want more than they end up with, and so the two sides are bickering back and forth about what to do. And the Americans and the British are going to negotiate a settlement to this solution. So we've seen so far how have we had a territory where we bought the Louisiana territory, right? We went to war with Mexico for Texas, California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, that area. Well, this situation is a little bit different. The British aren't selling, so we're not going to be able to buy it. And war is much less likely. It's one thing to go to war with Mexico, where our military is superior to theirs. Going to war with the British again, I mean, boy, we've done that twice already, and it hasn't been easy, right? With the Revolution and the War of 1812, we're just not in a position to take on Great Britain again. This could be disastrous. So we're going to have to come up with some sort of solution here, and it will ultimately end up being a negotiated solution. So both sides have claim on the land. We're negotiating to figure out what to do with it. And the first round of negotiation settles on this idea that let's just put off negotiations for 10 years and let's see where we're at in 10 years, and then we can negotiate. Well, the idea is then both sides will flood in people. And whichever side has more people in that area, it's they're going to have a stronger bargaining position when it comes time to negotiations. And so we're going to start flooding people up there. I say flooding, it's more of a trickle because it's really hard to get to Oregon. We're going to have to send them on the Oregon Trail, which we'll talk about later. Lots of people die doing that. It's a terribly tough journey, right? And so while that's going on, we have this like joint occupation of the territory that we're going to negotiate a little bit later down the line. By 1845, we got about 5,000 Americans there, and you're going to see expansionists and people known as Jingoists. And Jingoists are, they're very pro-American, anti-foreigner. And they really they're going to take a really strong stance on what they believe should be American territory. They want to go all the way up to the 54th parallel, 40 minutes north. That's like no way. no reasonable way should that be considered American territory. That's clearly Canadian territory. But the Jangoists and the expansionists, they're going to want to claim that territory anyway. And they come up with a catchphrase 5440 or fight, which essentially says we're going to take all of that northern territory, which is significantly in today what is today considered Canada, or we're going to go to war for it. That's scary because war with the British is no joke. That's not the same as war with Mexico. And so they're making these claims. But while this is going on, we are at war with Mexico, right? So what are the chances? I mean, what are the chances we're going to beat the British in a toe-to-toe fight? Well, we've done it once with the help of France in the Revolutionary War. We kind of did it in the War of 1812, if you remember from that lecture series. That was a draw at best. But what are the odds that we're going to be able to defeat the British while we're fighting the Mexicans, right? It's pretty slim. And so that means we're going to have to negotiate this. And because we're going to have to negotiate it, there's no way we're going to be able to get that 5440, all that northern territory. The rest of the border with Canada is essentially been settled on that flat line in the very north. That's the 49th parallel. And so what we'll do is we'll end up compromising with Great Britain and we'll settle on the 49th parallel. So when you take a look here, this is the map. The Oregon territory is all in that purple. The pink section right in the middle, that is land that the British claimed that they're going to have to give up, right? That's going to be all that, all the way down to the Columbia River there. The British wanted all that. The Americans wanted everything above that line in the middle. The 5440 goes all the way up to the top of the screen. We're going to have to give all of that territory up, which we have zero claim to, legitimate claim to anyway. And we'll settle on what that dotted line is in the middle there, with the exception of, the island there. So just all the way through the Puget Sound right there. And that will end up becoming the American-Canadian border. And so we are going to add and solidify the Oregon territory to our expansionist movement, and we do it diplomatically. So far we've bought land, we've gone to war for land, and now we are adding land diplomatically. Once we settle that territory, and even really before we settle that territory, we're going to start to be moving people into the Oregon territory through the Oregon Trail. One of the most famous trails in America. And so the route is going to go from Independence, Missouri, all the way up through the Oregon Territory, essentially taking the same route that Lewis and Clark took. So, it's very dangerous. People are going to have to get out there with covered wagons. They're going to have to be completely self-sufficient. They're going to have to, cross the Rockies. It's going to be, a pretty tough trip. And so the actual process of populating Oregon is going to be a very difficult, very time-consuming one. Takes several months to be able to complete it. If you're old or very young, sick at all, it can be very deadly. Lots of people will die along the way. So we're settling that territory. At the same time, we're trying to settle the territory and get people out into the regions that we took from Mexico, so out west. The more people we get in that territory, the more the more we solidify our control over the territory. Just because we won it in a war doesn't mean that we get to keep it forever, right? You actually have to control the territory. That's why Mexico lost all that land. They never actually, even though they owned it, they never actually controlled it. And so we start to send people out in that direction. And as we're sending people out in that direction, we're going to find that the Mormons are going to be critical in that. The Mormons are going to start to settle Utah, and particularly the area around the Great Salt Lake and the creation of Salt Lake City. That's vital to the to populating California. That area is very inhospitable, lots of deserts, and that's why the Mormons will go there, is because they're being persecuted everywhere else, and so they want an isolated area, and they're going to essentially turn Utah into like a rest stop on the way to California, which is going to make it way easier to get people to California, because as they're going through all that really inhospitable territory, they can stop at Salt Lake City, resupply, get fresh water, and then continue to move through to California. So, the settling of Utah is very important for the settling of California, and we can thank the Mormons for that. So, who are the Mormons? They are part of the Protestant faith. They're Christian, and so they believe in Jesus and the Christian God. But Joseph Smith in 1830 believes that he receives a new message from God, and so like a new addition to previous teachings of Christianity. He thinks he's got this special message, and he writes what is known as the Book of Mormon. Right. A lot of people are going to find a lot of people are going to be upset by this. They think it's sacrilegious. They don't believe that Joseph Smith is a new prophet, and so the Mormons, from essentially their inception, are going to be harassed. And as they're being harassed, they're going to be chased out of New York, Ohio, and Missouri, and Illinois. And so every time they go somewhere, they try to set up a community. They really just kind of want to be left alone. They want to practice their religion. And people are going to be, they feel like the Mormons are heretics, and so they're really going to start to persecute the Mormons. And so as they're bouncing around, they're going different places. They're feeling harassed, and they're starting to feel like there's no safe place for them. Eventually, they'll get to Nauvoo, Illinois, and when they get there, things are really going to start to change. The Mormons are essentially prospering, even though they're being persecuted. And then what will happen is Joseph Smith will pronounce something that's going to be very controversial in the United States. He's going to announce that men can marry more than one woman, polygamy. Now, I want to be clear here. Most Mormons today don't believe in polygamy, as of the vast majority. I mean, that is like it's so rare that it's hardly worth mentioning. But Joseph Smith does come out and say that the Old Testament practice. And so Christians, in the early on in Christianity, did practice this. The Old Testament, and so I guess that's pre-Christian, but still, people of the Christian faith had practiced this kind of practice, and it was meant to propagate the religion. And Joseph Smith announces this, and when he announces this, essentially, all hell breaks loose in Illinois. And so the people of Illinois are going to mob together. They're going to kill Joseph Smith and his brother, forcing another Mormon move. It's at this point that Brigham Young takes over. When Brigham Young takes over, he says, look, these people will not leave us alone. These people, meaning, society in general. And so he's going to head out to where he thinks they can be safe, which is out west, where they are essentially going to be isolated. And so, outside of the boundaries of the actual United States. And so that's when they head to Utah. They're going to choose the area outside of the Great Salt Lake, which will become Salt Lake City, as their home. The land is very inhospitable. There's lots of deserts, but because the Mormons, part of their religion is, there's this their very strict sense of right and wrong. There's this, great work ethic that's a part of their religion, industry and whatnot, that they're really going to kind of transform the area around the Great Salt Lake, land that nobody else wanted. They're going to take it and transform it into something very useful. So we'll see that the Mormons will prosper in the Great Salt Lake. They're going to irrigate all this desert land. They're going to flourish with trade because, like I said before, they act as kind of a way station as people moving on to California. And so industry is going to prop up. They will eventually establish their own government in Utah. And then with Brigham Young becoming the first governor of that area. By 1896, they will become the 45th state, and so because of kind of some religious persecution in the East Coast and Midwest, the Mormons are really going to have to flee that area and are going to help settle a really a previously you know an area that was previously viewed as unsettleable. And so, the Mormons did a really great job there. Now, as the Mormons are setting up there, we're going to see at roughly the same time the California Gold Rush, which is going to help explode the population of California. In 1848, at Sutter's Fort, gold is going to be found. Unfortunately, when that gold is found, they're not going to be able to keep the secret very well. And so you're going to see a rush of particularly young men flooding out to California, young unmarried men looking to get rich quick. And so you go from having a population of about 14,000 to about 100,000 in 1 year. Most people are not going to find gold. They're going to work real hard, toil real long, and end up not making themselves wealthy off gold. Now, there is a real good opportunity here. There are lots of people getting rich, but most of the people getting rich aren't getting rich from finding gold. They're getting rich selling shovels to people trying to find gold. I think there's a really important life lesson here, right? And the lesson is, don't try and get rich quick. You sense an opportunity, but be smart about the opportunity. Let the other guy take the risk digging a hole in the ground to find gold. You sell the guy the shovel. That's where real wealth is created. And so there's going to be lots of people making lots of money selling food and supplies, building saloons for, you got a whole bunch of young men in an area. The great way to make money is sell booze and food. They're probably not going to be cooking for themselves, gambling. And so, entire industries are going to pop up around these gold mines, because it's mostly young, unmarried men. There will be some slaves that are brought to California. So there will be slavery in California for a little bit. Eventually they'll get rid of slavery. But there's also a large portion of runaways that are going to head to, ultimately become free blacks, free African Americans. A lot of runaways that are heading to the California as well for the gold rush, and that makes sense. There's like very few opportunities for African Americans. It's the sailing is one of them, right? On a boat, nobody really cares about skin color. It's can you do your job? Because if you can't, we're all going to die. So, there's lots of African Americans that are going to, be able to make it in the middle class because they get a job sailing. There's going to be, there's this myth that cowboys in America are mostly like John Wayne white guys. That's not true. Most cowboys in America are Mexican descent, or there's a significant portion that are African American. And again, because it's a job that requires skill, and if you don't have the skill, people can die. And so people don't care so much about skin color in those situations. They just care about can you do it? And so a lot of African Americans do that, and a lot of African Americans move out looking for gold because it's one of the few opportunities that if they work hard and get a little lucky, they can acquire some wealth. And so you'll see runaways heading that way as well. Less than 5% of the population is going to be women and children. And that makes sense. It's a really hard life mining for gold. And so not a lot of women around. And then about 10% are Chinese. So you're going to start seeing this is going to be, a thing later. And we'll discuss this all the way up through World War II. The Chinese hear about gold in California because the California's on the Pacific coast. You're going to see that Chinese are going to make the trip to California to try to mine. And there's going to be issues out there, racial issues in California because of it. The Chinese are just culturally very, very different. And because they're very different, you're going to see, some uh, discrimination against the Chinese, and that'll last all the way up through World War II. As a matter of fact, during World War II, FDR is going to put a significant portion of the Asian population in concentration camps. We call them internment camps because we don't want to confuse them with German concentration camps, which are way worse. But we are going to take away due process and essentially imprison Asian people during World War II because we're fighting the Japanese, and so um, this history of discrimination against the Chinese is going to extend through the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, which we'll talk about in a future lecture, and all the way through World War II. So we'll continue this discussion in further lectures. Future lectures. So Native Americans a lot of times end up becoming kind of virtual slaves in these mines that are used as guides. The Chinese are also going to be used that way. And we're going to start to see the creation of boom towns. And so the boom towns are the businesses that pop up to service the needs of these miners. The miners, not minors, miners. And so these places are really raucous because it's young men that are there servicing their needs. We're going to see, lots of alcohol and gambling, prostitution. There'll be violence because, young drunk men. And so these boom towns some of them will really prosper, and some of them will survive the gold rush. Places like Denver and which is Colorado, but not technically part of the California Gold Rush, but San Francisco, other areas. But they're going to survive because they have other things other than gold that are going to keep them going. Most of these boom towns will eventually become ghost towns, and a ghost town is just I think everybody's heard of a ghost town before. It's just the skeletal remains of a town once all the people leave because the mines go bust and there's no more gold, and so we have these kind of boom bust situations with the gold rush. Eventually the gold is going to run out in California, but California has, with the growth in the population, there's other ways to make money there. Southern California's got all kinds of agricultural opportunities there. And you've got the coast for shipping and trade with Asia, which is going to be very important later. And so California is going to do all right. As a matter of fact, I don't know if this holds true this year because these numbers change yearly, and I haven't looked up in a while. If California today was its own country, it would be like the fifth or sixth largest economy in the world. And so settling of California is going to do great things for the United States economy in the long run. Now, we still have one more little piece we have to add, and that's going to be the Gadsden Purchase. The Gadsden Purchase is going to be this little area in the South. It's owned by Mexico. And so America really wants to build a southern transcontinental railroad. We want one going through the middle, where we're going to want one going through the top, and we're going to want a southern route. So we really want to build multiple ones. And we're talking about different routes. And to do a southern route, it becomes very difficult because we have a desert in the south. And so we really need land that is sturdy enough to hold the weight of a fully loaded train. And we don't have that, but Mexico does. And so in 1853, because we need this Southern Railroad route, Jefferson Davis, who at the time is the Secretary of War, he will later be the president of the Confederacy during the Civil War. So he's going to leave the Union. He sends James Gadsden to negotiate the purchase of the Gadsden Purchase. And so he goes down there, and essentially he's authorized to spend $15 million. He does a great job negotiating. And because, again, Mexico is in turmoil, Santa Anna needs a bunch of money. And so because Santa Anna is desperate for that money, Gadsden's like, I'm just going to say I'm authorized to spend $10 million and I'll save America $5 million. And so Santa Anna takes it, and we're going to add that 30,000 that 30,000 square miles. And so, which will be better land to be able to build a railroad across. If you see right there, when you're looking at next to Texas, so if you're looking west of Texas, that little brown area right there in Arizona, that is the Gadsden Purchase. And so, bada boom, bada bing, we have now created the Continental 48 states that we recognize today on the map. And so we've pieced it all together. And now we just need to build a railroad that travels across it so we can get people out there cheaply and quickly. And so the next lecture in this series, the final lecture in this series, is going to be about the Transcontinental Railroad and connecting all of this territory so we can not only move people out there, but we can move goods back and forth and trade, because that's going to be a very important part of this. So that concludes our lecture for today. I will see you again shortly. Thank you for your time.